Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. It's now the 162nd day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The authorities of the Donetsk region are appealing to residents to evacuate the endangered areas. Last night, Russians shelled Mykolaiv. In one district, residential buildings were destroyed. In another, there was a serious fire. Missiles also fell on Kharkiv and Nikopol. In recent days, Russia has spread information about a possible renewed attack on Kharkiv. The city's defenders say that they are prepared for any enemy action. Our defenders reliably defend the city and do not allow the enemy to break the front. Even Russian reconnaissance attempts fail. Invaders constantly suffer losses in the number of soldiers and equipment. Every day we strengthen fortifications and our defense capabilities. The occupiers are not successful at the front, but they spread disinformation. Out of powerlessness, they continue their terror against peaceful people. I warned citizens that we have information that in the coming days, the enemy will intensify missile attacks on the city of Kharkiv and its vicinity. As announced by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Special Forces units of the Belarusian Army were tasked with carrying out a combat readiness test. The Belarusian Ministry of Defense has announced that the country's military contingent will take part in the strategic exercise Vostok 2022, which will take place at the turn of August and September in the territory of the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian command states that it is prepared to repel the attack, if any. We analysed the enemy's actions towards Kiev so far and planned a counterattack. We placed defensive positions exactly in those places where the probability of an attack is greatest. We have also created a complex fire system. In turn, the population who survived the burden of the occupation fully supports the armed forces of Ukraine and other military formations and law enforcement agencies. I am sure that the enemy will not move in that direction again. The Russians are trying unsuccessfully to attack villages in the Kherson Oblast that were previously occupied by Ukrainian troops. The situation in southern Ukraine is complex and difficult. In order to prevent a counterattack by Ukrainian troops, Russia is increasing the number of troops towards Kryvyi Rih. Russian aviation began to operate more actively. Aeroplanes and helicopters attacked Ukrainian military positions several times. The Ukrainian Air Force, on the other hand, made 2 attacks on the enemy command points. The Operational Command South confirms that the command headquarters of the 22nd Corps of the Coastal Forces of the Black Sea Fleet of Russia has been destroyed in Chornoy-Baivka. The United Nations Secretary General announced that he would initiate a reconnaissance mission on the attack on the Olenivka camp, where Ukrainian prisoners of war held by pro-Russian separatists died as a result of the attack.
We received the requests from the Russian Federation and the requests from the Ukraine to do an investigation in relation to the events that you have mentioned. I decided, in line with my own competencies and power.
In recent days, many reports of conflicts and threats occurring in various parts of the world have appeared in the media and on social networks. First the Balkans, then Taiwan, now it could be the Caucasus. All these situations seem to be different, although they have one factor in common, namely, the global security architecture has failed. If it had worked, there wouldn't have been all these conflicts. This is what Ukraine has been drawing the world's attention to for years. Russia completely ignores international law and the interests of humanity. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that Russia has likely found a port that allows it to deliver crude oil bypassing Western sanctions. This is the small Egyptian El Hamra oil terminal. The terminal enables the mixing of Russian and Egyptian crude. Experts have already warned that Russia will try to export its raw materials in this way and that it is necessary to tighten sanctions as much as possible. The Chinese army is continuing its maneuvers in the waters and airspace surrounding Taiwan. 10 Chinese ships and military planes exceeded the so-called median line. That is, the informal line dividing the Taiwan Strait into the Chinese and Taiwanese parts. Meanwhile, elsewhere, clashes occurred in the mountainous Karabakh, in which 2 people from the Armenian side and 1 soldier from Azerbaijan were killed. 27 Chinese fighters have breached Taiwan's airspace. This demonstration of strength followed immediately after the visit to the island of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. On 4th of August, the Army Forces of the Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army carried out long-range live-fire training in the Taiwan Strait and carried out precise strikes on specific areas in the eastern Taiwan Strait and achieved the expected results. Using the sharpest rhetoric towards Nancy Pelosi, she failed to convince her to deviate from her decision to visit. Therefore, not to lose face, President Xi made decisions about this decisive action. In the face of mounting tensions between Beijing and Taipei, Taiwanese Foreign Ministry called for cyber vigilance as a record number of cyber attacks on government websites were recorded. Our government is even more resolute to safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our nation. In the light of the current scenario, our government will not only actively strengthen its self-defense capabilities, but will also maintain close ties with like-minded countries, such as the United States. Meanwhile, there are clashes between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces in mountainous Karabakh. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been fighting over these territories for decades. The lands lie within the borders of Azerbaijan. However, for the last 3 decades, they have been controlled by the Armenians. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defense of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic said that Azerbaijan had broken the terms of the ceasefire. You can look at it from the perspective of Azerbaijan's relations with Russia and this perceived weakness of Russia. One can also look at it from a broader perspective, that of the very multifaceted puzzle of political relations between Turkey and Russia, one aspect of which is the conflict in the mountainous Karabakh. Another aspect is the planned Turkish offensive in North Syria, which Russia is opposing. A few days ago, we were one step ahead of the outbreak of another conflict in the Balkans, namely Kosovo-Serbia. Pristina intended to introduce Kosovar registration plates for the Serb minority. Protesters blocked roads, erected barricades, and even fired at the police. Faced with the threat of an escalation of tension, the Kosovar government withdrew from this idea. Analysts are reminiscent of the Kosovo War of the 1990s. They also draw attention to the goals of Putin, who still cannot come to terms with the intervention of NATO at time. Vladimir Putin may have an interest in this to show the West that he still has influence and is able to trigger an internal conflict on European territory, since this conflict following the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement was not resolved in accordance with Russia's interests. The Syrian army, together with the Russians supporting it, began an exercise known as an offensive operation. These are the greatest maneuvers in modern history of Syria. Meanwhile, in Iraq, demonstrators have raided the parliament, and the country has had neither a president nor a prime minister for about 10 months. We know that part of the war in Ukraine is also played out there. First of all, it is all about raw materials, prices of raw materials, but it's also about a series of conflicts that can unfreeze at any moment. The issue of regulating northern Syria is one of its conflicts. The Damascus authorities have announced in the event of Turkish intervention in the area of Kurdistan, in the north of the country, they will react and will defend its territorial integrity. According to experts, the recurring conflicts may serve as a pretext for Russia to build new alliances. Russia is taking advantage of the international situation to perpetuate conflicts in other parts of the world in order to divert or distract attention focused on Ukraine at the moment. Beyond that, it seeks to build lasting alliances as Serbia is such a potential or historically enshrined ally of Russia. The hot astronomical summer this year coincides with the hot period in geopolitics. In many parts of the world, a spark is enough today for another serious crisis to join the Russian invasion of Ukraine. According to experts, the Kremlin authorities will seek to initiate new conflicts in order to divert attention of Ukraine's political partners from the Russian invasion. The Senate has passed amendments to the law on the Carbon Grant. The benefit is to be extended to farms that are heated with gas, fuel oil or pellets. The Law and Justice Party said that these amendments will be rejected by the parliamentary majority. Yesterday, senators debated about the Carbon Grant. The government's proposal provides for a one-off payment of 3,000 zloty to households relying on coal for heating. A carbon grant for nearly 4 million households that heat their premises with coal or coal derivatives, with the assumption that 85% of this is coal. According to the Law and Justice politicians, this government bill answers the crisis caused by Russia. Coal prices due to the war in Ukraine, an energy crisis that Russia caused before the war in Ukraine even broke out, but the war in Ukraine exacerbated this crisis. Due to the embargo on coal from Russia, prices have increased many times over in European markets. The Civic Platform Party accused the government of injustice in the distribution of funds. If we give benefits to someone, they should be fair and should apply to a whole group of people to whom they should be due, so that we don't divide people, but that they are simply benefits that apply to the whole spectrum of people who are in exactly the same conditions. The government has announced that the Sejm will reject the amendments. Today, Deputy Finance Minister Artur Soboń said that the government is working on extending subsidies also for households that use fuels other than coal, pellets, gas or heating oil. We are prepared today as far as the budget situation is concerned. It is not bad, because after the first half of the year is even a slight surplus. But of course, we are cautious in planning expenditure, especially in the context of 2023. Here we are cautious, but this does not mean that we are not able to finance these kinds of benefits. Experts estimate the support is needed, but that due to high inflation it should be limited.
Trzeba na pewno
It is certainly necessary to consider
zastanowić
whether
się,
everyone
czy
needs this
na pewno
3,000 zloty support,
każdemu
or whether it should be
trzeba
directed to
tych
those who are
3000
threatened by
złotych
energy
wsparcia,
poverty.
czy
This is a
powinno
question
to
for the
zostać
government.
skierowane do tych, których
Now the Act with the amendments will go to the lower house of Parliament. The carbon grant is the government's response to the energy crisis caused by Russia's barbaric attack on Ukraine. Applications for the grant may be submitted by the 30th of November, in person at municipal offices or via the internet. A volcano has erupted near the capital of Reykjavik and the main airport in Iceland. The explosion took place yesterday evening after days of rising earthquake activity in the area and was preceded by 10,000 tremors signalling underground magma movements. For now, there is no information about whether the traffic at Keflavik Airport will be suspended. Aerial video showed lava and smoke spewing from a fissure on the side of the Fagradalsfjall mountain, which last year saw an eruption that lasted for 6 months. Tourists and residents should avoid the area due to poisonous gases, although there was no immediate risk of damage to critical infrastructure, the Department of Civil Protection and Emergency Management said in a statement. A code red was declared to prohibit aeroplanes from flying over the site, although helicopters were sent in to survey the situation. If the outbreak were to be confirmed to be similar to the fissure seen last year, the aviation alert would likely be lowered to orange, signalling less danger, an agency spokesman said. The Reykjanes Peninsula is a volcanic seismic hotspot, and the outbreak took place just 25 kilometres from Reykjavik and 15 kilometres from the nation's international airport. In March last year, lava fountains erupted spectacularly in the area from a fissure 500 to 750 metres long, continuing until September and attracting thousands of Icelanders and tourists to the scene. Located between the Eurasian and the North American tectonic plates, among the largest on the planet, Iceland frequently experiences earthquakes and has a high volcanic activity as the two plates move in opposite directions. That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Polar Daily Business and more programmes. But from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.